I'm not afraid to say it. LFG kind of sucks. Whenever you're applying to groups just a bunch, over and over again, you're getting declined from the groups. You're trying to slowly gain score, but you have a bunch of 17s or 18s, but you really feel like you can get up to that 20 range. Getting declined from LFG is just a terrible solution because people are either looking for a meta composition, which sometimes you don't fit depending on the season. Some people are only looking for these unicorns with infinite score that are going to come and carry their key, which again, you don't fit into because you're just trying to, progress dungeons one level at a time. You're not going to be going and doing this weekly 20 because you're not 3,300 IO trying to just do a 20 in LFG. You're, let's say, 2,300 and you're trying to do a 20, and people who have all their 20s done are like, 2,400 or something like that. And so your situation ends up something like this, which is a fairly common situation. I have been in positions like this. I described the screenshot offline, but like I've been in similar situations like this where it's just like I'm continuously getting declined, or not declined, but not necessarily invited to groups either. And so that creates a situation where you get tweets like this, where Gingy tweeted out today, imagine M plus solo shuffle, queuing up with people who are similar MMR/rating as you. Think would be pretty sick. Toxicity and leaving would result in MMR loss and in-game social score reductions, which could result in a queue ban. Obviously, he's talking about like reasons that it would be negatively impacted and like some potential pitfalls of the system. But I think that let's talk about just M plus solo queue as a whole. He says solo shuffle, but let's just talk about it in regards to like what a solo queue M plus system would look like. And what are generally my thoughts on it, because I think that not many people will agree with my immediate take, but I hope that whenever I talk through this, I can give just my thoughts on it, and hopefully you guys will kind of see my side of this and kind of hopefully agree with me. So I think that's like kind of outline how M plus solo queue would work. So by starting out, like what problem is it trying to solve? Generally, people are getting denied from keys, and interacting with LFG is pretty toxic. I think that we can all agree that LFG is really, really annoying and frustrating to deal with at times, and interacting with it is really annoying. And a queuable solution, something similar to like looking for dungeon or like LFR, could be a potential solution. So generally how this would look in my mind is it's like looking for dungeon with an MMR or score system that goes up and down as you time or deplete keys. You would determine fail conditions in a couple of different ways, and he's talking about like some potential pitfalls with this, but I think you would have to determine fail conditions in a couple of different ways, where if you like deplete the key or somebody leaves the dungeon, that counts as a fail. You end up losing score based off of that, but I don't think you should get a deserter penalty if you leave the dungeon. I think that all 5 players just end up losing score. Kind of similar to most other modern 5v5 multiplayer games. If you think of like any shooters, like League of Legends, stuff like that, there are many different multiplayer avenues where you either win or you lose. You either succeed or you don't. And if you time the key, our score goes up. And if you deplete the key or somebody leaves or whatever, score goes down. I think for intentionally griefing, you could probably report people, and there should definitely be some repercussions if there is an M plus solo queue. In most solo queue video games, there are some forms of repercussions if you are not abiding by like social contracts that you have to sign. And I mean, like we have a new social contract, and I'm sure that they could implement, griefing an M plus solo queue as something that you could get banned for, or get on like a deserter penalty or something like that. Be on a low priority queue. There's thousands of different solutions for griefing and whatnot. I think loot, I wrote down some notes. Loot would actually need to be vendor based with a currency action, which is something that with the current system of M+, loot is in a situation where you just get end of dungeon rewards. End of dungeon rewards would have to be completely scrapped, and solo queue would have to be the predominant form of M+ content. And I think that, well, at least with solo queue, you would have to have some level of vendor currency. Now, I do think that there would be a world where like normal M+ with like a full 5-man group that you've created yourself could coexist potentially with like a solo queue avenue whenever you wanted to just kind of queue it up with friends. But the loot situation would be very difficult to tackle if both of these coexisted. And that's an immediate like red flag to me, is like, oh, how do you have these both coexist if one of them is on a completely different loot system than the other? And that seems like a very difficult thing to manage. And I think that just like vendor currency is probably the best way to, if you were going to have them both exist in two separate venues, to make sure that one of them is not just significantly superior to the other of like getting gear. So solo queue is just like an MMR based system where you're grinding points, whereas like doing dungeons as it currently is could be for grinding points, but not everybody has the exact same motives or goals, where some people are doing dungeons for gear, some people are doing dungeons for valor. Everybody's doing dungeons for maybe a little bit different things, and some people are grinding for score. That's how it is. So that's kind of the outline of how M+ solo queue would work. Now, let's talk about some of my thoughts just generally on what M+ solo queue would happen, and what would happen with it. And let me let you in on a little secret. I kind of hate this idea. And I hope you don't immediately just turn this video off. I hope you kind of listen to my explanation of why I don't think this is a good idea, because this might be an unpopular opinion. First off, we already kind of have M+ solo queue. It's LFG no voice dungeons. LFG no voice dungeons are honestly, sometimes they're actually pretty fun. Whenever I'm looking for nice stream content, I'll be pugging LFG no voice dungeons. Sometimes if I'm looking to farm out a specific item, LFG no voice dungeons are typically my go-to for that. If I'm just playing with friends or whatever, and we're just kind of sitting around in Valdrakken, sometimes we'll just queue it up and play around just to get some dungeons going. I enjoy playing the game. Sometimes I don't have necessarily a strict goal in mind, and sometimes doing LFG is pretty fun. But LFG no voice dungeons are effectively solo queue, except your points aren't going up and down. Your points are only going up in this avenue. LFG already is solo queue, and many people don't like how it's already structured. The argument for LFG sucking is more often than not that people only take meta classes, but in the reality, you aren't really going to want to play with say you got locked into like a really bad composition. Say you got locked into a composition where you queue into like Blood Death Knight, Holy Priest, Warlock, Shadow Priest, Moonkin, or something like that, right? Where you just have no kicks, you don't have like a meta class on like mini rolls, and you just end up in a situation where you have no kicks and you zone into, Algothar Academy. It's like, oh my god, how are we supposed to do this dungeon if we don't have any interrupts or like AoE stops and stuff like that? You're gonna have a really hard time. In addition to that, where you're gonna run into similar issues in solo queue, where unless you are absolutely cracked, you might just get stuck because your class is really bad. In a different situation where right now, a lot of the times you're able to potentially outplay being, stuck by your score by just being a better player. You get into a more meta composition where your class fits in a little bit better. I can't imagine being in a situation where I run into a composition where I have like no lust and no interrupt, like, which is that, Blood DK, Holy Priest, Warlock, Priest, Moonkin. It's just like no lust, no kicks, that it has some things going for it, but we have two priests, or like if say you had multiple copies of a character, there would have to be a lot of restrictions in regards to like what comps you could and couldn't have, which at that point is like getting really out in the weeds, because Blizzard then every single season would have to change based on what comps are meta, because some seasons you want multiple of whatever class, but a lot of seasons you don't want multiple of the same class in your composition. Additionally, we've already seen this with solo shuffle, but queue times are ridiculous. And I think that for solo queue and plus, you would already end up with way worse queue times. Queue times for, if you're just in LFG, you can kind of get a group relatively quick, assuming that you're applying for something that's within your wheelhouse or within your range for being able to do the key. And you can get into a group fairly quick. But with solo shuffle right now, as it is on live, I know people who wait well over 30 minutes and they're not even like that high rated just to get a queue as DPS. Now, there is one fewer slot because solo shuffle is trying to fill 6 slots, but whereas M+ would only have to fill 5. But at the same point, you would run into issues where your queue times would be ridiculous, and that's, in my opinion, going to degrade the experience, especially if your dungeon gets lost on the first couple of pulls, and then you're like, oh, great, now I'm really thankful that I spent my time in queue, and now I have to get out of here. Where in reality, I think that LFG is a little bit more fine for that, because then if you mess up the dungeon on the first pull and you were there for score, you just zone out and you're like, all right, well, I guess go find a new group. That's not that big of a deal. In addition to that, solo queue has some elements of losing points / MMR, which I can't really imagine a world of losing points. If I queued into some non-ideal comp, that would be so tilting for me. Just the idea of we fail the dungeon for whatever reason, and then I lose points over something that generally is not in my control, because I don't think that the scoring system for World of Warcraft dungeons is great for taking score away, where a solo queue, solo shuffle style system has to have some punishment for failure, right? Your score is not just going to go up in a solo queue or solo shuffle style system. It has to go down just to make sure that MMR doesn't only rise, because that doesn't make any sense. Because you have to be able to matchmake people with people of equal skill. And if it only went up, then it just doesn't make any sense like that. So, I mean, generally my thoughts are like, it's a utopian system that can really never work with how WoW works as a game and M+ as a system. And LFG, as it currently stands, already is like a solo queue, a solo shuffle environment, whether we like it as players or not. That kind of is already the solution in WoW. And I think that if Blizzard were to implement and kind of take out the lens at which people invite players via LFG, that would also just make the game a little bit worse. Now, it would make it a lot faster to access, or not faster to access. What do I exactly do? I mean, it would make it to where you don't have to interact with LFG at all, which people already have a negative perception on LFG because they get, like I had this screenshot up the whole entire time. They get this negative perception of LFG because they get declined from a lot of dungeons, and they wouldn't have to interact with LFG, which I do generally think is a positive, but they would have negative experiences in other ways as well, which I don't think that this necessarily solves the negative experience with WoW. And I think that, like, as it currently stands, LFG, while it's not perfect, would certainly be better than a queuable system where you have points that go up and go down. And I think that, like, what we have right now is a lot more reasonable for players just as a whole. I mean, just quickly, my last point too, LFG is also multi-use in the sense of you see people in LFG that list their group for specific things. They list their group for completion. They list their group for no levers. They list their groups for valor farms. And that's one of the advantages of having a multi-use system like LFG already is, as opposed to replacing it with a solo queue system, which is only for people who are looking to push score. I'm really, really interested in hearing what you guys think about this. Do you think that this is something that needs to be changed? Like, do we think that M+ solo queue should be something that's on the table for Blizzard to be looking at moving into the future? I don't think it would be coming out soon. It'd become maybe like 11.0. But is it something that Blizzard should be looking to do? Or are you guys kind of thinking along the same lines as me, where M+ is already kind of in a fine state where you have groups that have competing interests and you're able to kind of facilitate one full system that works, whether it be if you're just playing by yourself, LFG is for you. Whereas if you're playing with the 5-man group and you're trying to push score, the system also still kind of works for you. If you're just trying to farm gear, the system still, it's not perfect for any single group of people, but it's a system that works for most differing parties. And do you guys agree with that? Do you guys disagree with that? Do you think that there needs to be something changed? I'm really interested in your thoughts down in the comment section below. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.